it's trash. You can't use all the CO2 we produce. You're going to run out of places to put CO2 way before we get all of it captured. Right? Realistically, right now, in the United States, very straightforward. There are no regulations telling you can't emit CO2, but Uncle Sam's going to pay $85 a ton, tax-free. That's a huge cherry.
Yep.
All right. Our technology, for example, costs about $40 to capture a ton of CO2. That means I'm getting about $45, give or take, of tax-free money in exchange for my effort. That's a good deal. I actually own 2 patents in the United States. Both of them deal specifically with how to make carbon markets. Mm-hmm. They were originally targeted at blockchain applications, but in fact the application is pretty much ubiquitous. Technically speaking, you're talking to the person who owns the patent on how to do this.
Alex Economides worked in high finance, managing multi-million-dollar portfolios, before building a highly successful publication focused on global energy analysis. He now leverages his expertise to accelerate and commercialize carbon capture technology. Today, we gain some insight from a man helping to shape the future of the energy industry. Welcome to Wisdom at the Wellhead. This episode of Wisdom at the Wellhead by TotalStream is brought to you by New Tech Global.
Welcome to another episode of Wisdom at the Wellhead. I'm Kevin Fischer with TotalStream Systems. Today, my co-host is Philip Richard with Porosity. Nice to see you again. Today's guest is very special. It's brought to you by New Tech Global Auburn. He is an advisor for them in their energy transition. Welcome, Alex Economides.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on today. So your career is stretched over a lot of different industries. You know, you've been through financial analysis to publications to energy consulting, and now you're a fractional CFO with Occam's Technology. What got you to this point? What would you tell people you do on a daily basis?
Well, so a lot of it for me has always been about evaluation. So looking at a different company, looking at their business ideas, looking at what they're trying to do from a technology perspective, and figuring out really how do we quantify this? How do we tell a story about a company that people can understand? So with Occam's, it's kind of the same thing as always, starting, with publishing, for example, we would think about how do we communicate the idea to the readers. Now I'm thinking about how I communicate an idea about a company to a financier or to a potential client. And frankly, it's a very similar skill set when it's all said and done.
What got you into, when you were out of school, what got you into financial analysis?
Oh, it was absolutely an accident.
Yeah.
So, I'm one of those people who walk into an interview and I just start talking about what I think I want to do or how I sell myself. Mm-hmm. And it ends up landing me in trouble most of the time because I get jobs I'm not really qualified for, when I was a young kid.
Yeah.
But I came in, I met this woman who was managing about $100 million in assets here in Houston.
Yeah.
And I told her, I was good with numbers. I was good with Excel. I knew how to do this kind of work. And she gave me more responsibility than I probably deserved, but I ended up earning it.
Yeah.
And so she put me in charge of about $20 million worth of bonds that we had to buy or sell for that portfolio. And I just got straight into it and started learning how to do it. I walked in on day one. I'd never seen a Bloomberg terminal in my life. By 6 months, I was pretty much an expert with them, this kind of thing. And so that's kind of the story of my career, just biting off more than I could chew and then figuring out how to chew it anyway.
What's the skill you think that really, made you able to succeed doing that?
I don't know, just persistence and a willingness to learn.
Yeah. A
lot of things are easier than they seem when you look at them from the outside, but you have to get in there and actually learn how to do them. You have to, get your hands dirty, if you get my drift.
Right. So in essence, you were curious in how you had to get down to the bottom of how this worked.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so one of the things that I think is really important is if you sit there and let a problem be the thing that you just look at a problem and you go, okay, I have a problem. I don't know how to solve it. I don't know what to do anything about it. That's not a good strategy.
Right.
A good strategy is to sit down, talk to people, be very interested in what is actually causing this problem and figuring out how to, get to the bottom of what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And as a consultant, that's almost my entire job description right there.
Right.
Is talking to people and getting to the bottom of what it is that they're trying to solve, which a lot of times maybe they don't even know. And that's a real common thing. So you have to ask the right questions and you have to care about what their answers are and you have to really listen and make sure that you're paying attention.
Yeah. So seeing so many different types of industries, how do you come in and fit yourself into an industry you may not have as much experience in?
So I make I make this joke often, right? Fundamentally, what I do is math for a living, okay? And math doesn't care. Math is not interested in, whether you're quantifying one type of widget or another. So it's the same math if I'm calculating, levelized cost of electricity generation as it is if I'm calculating what your levelized cost of carbon capture is.
Right.
So you have to understand that rudimentary fact. And that gives me confidence when I'm talking to people that no matter what they're asking me, probably I know the answer. The hard part, and the part where I set myself aside or I differentiate myself from a lot of other people, is you do have to learn about their business. You have to understand, how they make their widgets or whatever that is they do. And that's important because, numbers don't tell the whole story. Numbers aren't people.
Right.
Numbers aren't, people that need to be convinced to do things. But at the end of the day, if you understand how a company works, then you can usually start to solve their problems, start to help them out.
So you went from, being a financial analyst, and then you completely got into an industry you'd never been in. You got the publishing route.
Right.
Tell me about that.
Okay, so I'm going to give you the short version of the story.
Yeah.
Right. So I was working as a financial analyst, as I mentioned before, helping them figure out what bonds to buy, and looking into, how to evaluate different companies and figure out which ones made the most sense. Because we were looking for bonds that would upgrade. So they were junk bonds that would end up hopefully going to, for example, A- status, which is a huge financial boon.
Yeah.
And out of the blue one day, my father called me up, said, you know what, I'm thinking about starting a monthly periodical. So a printed magazine in the energy space dealing with, frankly, international geopolitics mostly, more than anything else, but about the energy business.
Yeah.
And he said, look, would you like to come in and work with me? I need someone to help manage this day to day, because he was a full-time consultant at the time.
Yeah.
So he had time to write an article a month or maybe two.
Yeah.
And maybe give some direction a little bit to some authors, but that's about it, And magazines are complicated. It's not, if you could just publish a magazine by gathering 20 articles, great, but everyone would do it. That's not how that works, right?
Yeah.
You have to get things to printers. You need to, manage day to day. You need to make sure invoices get paid, things
The
like that.
logistics are.
So he asked me in to come in and help him with that, and I did. And so then we launched a magazine at the time called the World Energy Monthly Review. And that lasted for about a year and a half or so, at which point we decided to separate from the original parent company, World Energy, and start our own.
Oh, wow.
And so we then went and launched a company called Energy Tribune Publishing, which for that company now I was a CEO, not an associate publisher or anything like that.
Right.
Launched a website, got it up and running. But in that year and a half working for World Energy, the CEO of that company, a guy named Richard Loomis, he's just an absolute expert in publishing. He taught me probably more than he even realized he taught me in that period of time. And I was, soaking it up like a sponge, trying to learn everything about it. And that led to us launching, our own website eventually, our own publication. And, I think I've mentioned it to you, but, that website did quite well. So
because you were in a time when print media was kind of, I wouldn't say it was on its way down, but it was moving to online formats, and you guys went ahead and took that jump.
That's right. But so, it's kind of funny how these things go, right? We entered into a bit of a dying industry, but then we did pretty well in one that was growing.
Yeah.
So as far as the internet website went, just by virtue of understanding how to do content generation and doing quite a lot of it and being very targeted and very smart about what we were publishing, we were able to garner, frankly, a huge amount of traffic. So, at the time we had something like 60,000 unique visitors a month.
Wow.
Which in 2006, 2007 is not a small website. But nowadays, right, who would care?
Sure.
No one would care,
Right.
But in 2006, 2007, that was a big number. And we were publishing a lot, getting a lot of traffic, getting a lot of information out of there.
Why do you think that, digital thrived like that while the print media was not thriving as much as the digital platform did?
Man, okay, so I'll give you my opinion, but I'm so far from an expert on that kind of a subject. I think it's just the way people consume media.
Yeah,
I think people have changed. I don't think a lot of people have the time to sit down and really pick up a printed piece of material the way they used to. I mean, I still love to, but I'm a fossil now compared to people who are probably out there thinking about buying books or not buying books. So I don't think there's anything more to say than it's so convenient now to have things digitally that print kind of fell by the wayside as a result.
So at its largest, how many people do you guys have at this publication? How many articles are you putting out, say, a week, per month, or?
It's probably easier to think of in terms of the physical size of the magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So we started out with a publication that was really, really small. I think it was 16 pages, including front and back covers. This is tiny, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the time we reached the peak of the publication, we had over 100 pages of printed material, including advertisements and articles and stuff like that. So, we grew a lot over that period of time, and it got quite big. As far as the total number of people who were employed, like at the company, it was probably more like 4 or 5 people. But in terms of the number of people who were writing for us, that could be as many as 20 on any given magazine.
Okay.
So
let's kind of go into where you're at nowadays with Occam's technology. Tell me about what Occam's does.
Right. So Occam's Technology is a company that is focused on a technology called direct oxy-fire carbon capture. So basically what that is, I mean, I'm going to describe it as actually pretty simple. Okay. So engines have intakes. They bring in oxygen and they bring in fuel, and then they combust. And whether they're diesel or gasoline engines, they kind of operate, at least what I just said there is reasonably consistent across both types of engines. Right. So what Occam's does is it controls what goes into the engine so that we can control what goes out of the engine. Okay. Now this sounds simple. It's exactly as simple as I just described. Right. So if you take an atmosphere, you got nitrogen, you got sulfur, you got all kinds of things that ends up mixed in with the fuel. So when it burns, you end up with NOx and SOx and all kinds of other particulate pollutants that you don't want. Plus also the CO2 emissions that you're going to make are pretty low concentration. So they're below 10%.
Okay.
If instead you use pure oxygen or relatively pure oxygen plus fuel, now you go back to the textbook combustion, which means you just produce CO2 and water. Okay, well, water's relatively easy to filter out, and CO2, if it's relatively pure, is super easy to manage. So to make the long story kind of short, all right, we're able to get the concentration of the CO2 that we get off of an engine high enough that it's cheap for us to then get the whole thing in almost pure form. We can make close to food grade CO2 off of an engine, off of a dirty diesel or natural gas engine.
Wow.
So, and by the way, I should also mention cheaply.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm not really here to sell that stuff, but going back to what we were talking about earlier, when they came to me originally, the first thing I did, sit down and evaluate this company, take a look at what they're doing. How much is it going to cost? What is this, operationally speaking, how much capital we have to spend, all this other stuff. I started running the numbers and I said, well, hey, you know what? This is cheaper than Uncle Sam is willing to pay us for this carbon. This is cheaper than the penalty right now in Canada, where the company's from, for the CO2, the emissions that you would make off of something like natural gas. Well, I said, well, if it's cheaper, that means it's profitable. If it's profitable, everyone should do it. And I said, yeah, sign me up. Let's get a contract going. I'll come work for you. I'll be actually, I wasn't fractional CFO yet, but I said, I'll be your, an analyst, or I'll be the person who helps you put together these things, get your presentations up and ready, everything like that.
Yeah.
We've been working on it ever since. And, I frankly, I love this company. I hope it's as successful as it should be. And it's a startup. So keep in mind, we're itty bitty tiny, but this is a company that I think has legs if it gets the right push in the right direction.
So tell us a little bit about the industry application around it. Where is Occam's Technology kind of focusing into what industry applications?
Sure. So the technology was originally developed, or is in fact currently being developed in partnership with a company called Precision Drilling out of Canada. Now, basically, where this company or where this technology comes in is it's really good for service providers who are bringing sort of these 1 megawatt size engines, which they're not small, but they're not huge either.
Right.
And they're ubiquitous. So there's about 1 million of them in North America alone. And, this is basically a bolt-on solution to that. Now, I mean, that's an oversimplification.
Yeah.
You don't literally just go and snap it on, but it's designed to handshake with the standard engine styles. And so consequently, we should be able to do that. It's not cheap, but it's profitable. So consequently, you have to make that decision. Do we want to put out some extra capital cost to make it work? But if you do, at least in the United States for sure, you're going to make more money than it costs you.
But if there's even regulatory requirements that are kind of moving people to have to do something about this, correct?
Not really, no.
Okay.
There maybe look. That's almost a political question, and I would tend to avoid those.
Yeah.
Realistically, right now, there are penalties in Canada for emissions.
Okay.
They charge you about $80 a ton.
Oh, okay.
If you capture that CO2 back, they don't necessarily give you that penalty back. You can go and sell the fact that you did so on the voluntary market, which is unfortunate. So you're paying $80 and then getting paid $20 to fix the problem. That doesn't make a lot of sense. No. We're trying to talk with them and see about them changing some of that policy or making exceptions with respect to if you use something like what we're doing. Right. In the United States, very straightforward. There are no regulations telling you can't emit CO2, but Uncle Sam's going to pay $85 a ton, tax-free, liquid that you can sell to anybody you want. Okay, that's a huge cherry. Yep. All right. Our technology, for example, costs about $40 to capture a ton of CO2. That means I'm getting about $45, give or take, of tax-free money in exchange for my effort. That's a good deal, right? In Europe, there are regulations that are starting to limit these things, and that might be very fertile ground for us. But the energy costs out there are higher, which makes it harder for us to be profitable for them. And the value of the carbon credits that they're equivalent to a carbon credit, right, isn't quite high enough for it to be more than just marginal for us. Yeah. So while we're looking at them, we're not seriously considering Europe right now. We are seriously considering Canada and the United States, right? So that's different. By the way, as an aside, how ironic is it that the United States would be a better place for a carbon capture project than Europe? Right. No one would ever expect that, right?
No.
And I mean, but nonetheless, I would argue that it probably is.
So is the idea then to dispose of that through means like CCS or put it in a CO2 pipeline? What's kind of the
so it depends. And this is one of those things. This is where I really earn my money, right? Because people ask me a question like that, and then I start thinking about the specific application. And the answer is it depends. And let me tell you what I mean by it depends. So first of all, you've already touched on two real options, and I mentioned one earlier, right? We can make food grade CO2, but you have to be somewhere that needs food grade CO2, which is not everywhere, right? They pay better, but by the way, just as an aside, food grade CO2 is a lot of money. That's $600 a ton, not $85. Yeah. Okay.
Or sell it to Buc-ee's for all their fountain drinks.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, to be fair, yes, but that's a tiny, tiny, tiny market, right? But yeah, so pipeline, but also there's situations where by controlling the intake, maybe we don't have to take it all the way to high purity, so long as we can properly measure and make it a high purity, not so in other words, when I say high purity, I mean 99 or 95% CO2, but 70 might suffice under certain scenarios. Yeah. And those cases can be really interesting too. So for example, we have had some talks with people who run compression stations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a compression station might be sitting on top of a place where you could deposit the CO2.
Sure.
Right? So we don't need to make it super pure because who cares? It's just going in the ground anyway. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But we're capturing all of it. Right. The emissions now of that compression station are zero okay. Let's call it zero for the sake of this discussion. I don't want to quibble about, like 99% capture versus whatever. But, effectively zero. And, you've eliminated that environmental impact almost entirely. Yeah. But I don't know, decide whether it's a huge deal or not. I'll tell you, the government will pay for that, which means it's a huge deal. Yeah. So that's all that really matters. Yeah.
So where do you think the voluntary carbon markets are headed? Do you think we'll ever have a viable carbon market, carbon trading platform here in the U.S. where people actually can achieve money off of these?
So okay, I'm going to answer that question, but I don't think you're aware of something, and this is kind of funny. This is a little bit my fault. So I actually own a patent here in the United States. In fact, I have two patents in the United States. Both of them deal specifically with how to make carbon markets. They were originally targeted at blockchain applications, but in fact the application is pretty much ubiquitous. Okay. So technically speaking, you're talking to the person who owns the patent on how to do this. And the answer to your question is it's going to be hard. Yeah. Because here's the thing. It's trash. CO2 is trash. It's not particularly useful. Sure. People are looking for ways to make CO2 useful, and they're struggling. And we've mentioned one. And, there's some EOR stuff that people have looked at. EGR things again, enhanced gas. That's great, but to the extent that that's not you can't use all the CO2 we produce for that because you're going to run out of places to put CO2. Yeah. way before we get all of it
Before
captured,
we could
right?
use it.
Right.
And as far as the markets are concerned, well, they're really, really hard. So the reason why I set out a few years ago and started writing that patent in the first place was that it's really hard to make a carbon market that makes sense.
Mhm.
Now, let me explain to you what I mean by that. Let's say you capture CO2 from a plant, right? Like we're using a tree or something like that, right? Well, that carbon credit costs you basically nothing. When you planted a tree, congratulations, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas if I capture carbon off of an engine, well, that's challenging. That's a really hard thing to do, and it costs real money, right?
Quite a bit more tangible too.
Yeah.
Well, exactly right.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is these carbon markets really weren't very level playing field kind of situation. Like,
Sure.
you know, you got people who want to come in, like direct air capture might cost $150 a ton,
Right.
right? Versus my technology, which might be $50 a ton or $40 a ton, right? Okay, how are we ever going to compete in the carbon market with people who are getting their carbon capture for essentially free?
Yes.
Right.
It's doubly bad because a lot of those credits are, and I don't want to I'm not trying to attack an entire industry when I say this. This is a universal thing that they themselves would agree with. Some of those carbon credits are fairly dubious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Meaning that they've been issued for something that probably didn't deserve it. Doesn't meet any of the standards, but I'm not only talking about things like incrementality, which environmentalists care about a lot.
Right.
I'm talking about, did they capture carbon at all? And the answer might be no. Okay. And so we looked at that and we said, look, if it was a fair market, the price would be about $80, right? Which shockingly is about the number that it got raised to under the IRA. And by the way, just to be clear, you know, that's a Joe Biden thing. Okay. If you're politically on the right, then you go, oh, Joe Biden did it. And I said, well, yeah, well, Donald Trump agreed.
Yeah.
He kept it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not a left or a right thing. This is what they decide they want to pay for this stuff.
Yeah.
Fair enough. That's about the number we thought it should be.
Yeah.
You know, right now the carbon markets are in the tank. So I don't even know if you're aware of this, but there is at the CME, there's a commodities future trading under a company called Expansive.
Yep.
And their credits are about $2.
Mm.
Okay, let me tell you something. Nobody in the carbon capture space, unless they're getting them for free, even would bother getting up in the morning to make coffee to think about having a discussion about earning $2 a ton.
Yeah.
Okay. Like it's not even worth it. That person will stay in bed. Actually, no, that person will get a different job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically. Right. So you got to figure out a way to make that number higher. We were working on that. That's what, okay, tap myself on the shoulder, pat myself on the back, right? That was what our patent was about doing.
Right.
But realistically, even if it wasn't for me or someone thinking about these things, someone has to do that. If they don't do that, it'll never happen.
Right.
We have to decide forever that we're going to spend, effectively, what will it be? Trillions of dollars of government money on capturing carbon. And then, that's a hard decision to make because I think about half of Americans don't think it's worth anything to capture carbon. So how do you justify trillions of dollars of U.S. government spending?
Right.
Right? If 50% of the people don't even agree that it should be any, right? So that's tough.
This technology in general isn't, when you say like oxy-fuel, oxy-combustion, it's not a new ideology at all, is it? It's been around for a long time.
That's right. Yeah. So this technology has been around since, World War II, thereabouts. Basically it was first developed as a way to keep submarines underwater longer.
Okay.
So the idea was, right, you're burning diesel, deep beneath the water.
Mm-hmm.
You probably don't want a long stream of bubbles that are really obvious from.
Yes,
probably don't. Yeah.
Probably going to kill the reason for being upset.
I from what I understand, submarines tend to be stealthy.
Yes.
Right? So you probably don't want that, right? So they came up with a technology that by controlling the intake,
Mm-hmm.
which is very similar to what we do, right? By putting pure oxygen in, they could ensure that they got very nearly pure CO2. Then they could liquefy it and pressurize it, which is not exactly the same thing as we're doing, but it's not far.
Right.
Right. And then when they released it from the submarine, they could control that it just stayed at that level.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Because if you think about it, like if you compress something enough, you can make it the same density as the water around. This is, by the way, sorry, I am nowhere near technical enough to really tell you how this works.
Right.
But the bottom line idea is they could manipulate the CO2 exhaust so that it just sat at the level of the submarine or thereabouts.
Right.
Right.
Which means there is no stream of
It's
bubbles
just like you're
going
leaking
anywhere.
liquid out instead of leaking bubbles.
Exactly right. So they figured out how to do this. Now, mind you, navies don't have corporate budgets,
Right.
right? The U.S. Navy does not care
Yes.
if it costs money, if this is more expensive than a normal operating submarine, because the 100 people who are crewing that submarine are way more important than whatever it costs them to do this, right?
Right, 100%.
Corporations don't work that way. Corporations do care about money, okay? So there's been a lot of need to develop this further and enhance the efficiency, improve the way it works over what, for example, the U.S. government would have studied, 70, 80 years ago,
Yeah.
right?
This just kind of shows that, old tech, just because it's old technology doesn't mean it's not viable in our current,
Yeah, so actually, I'll take it a step further. So old technology maybe has always been viable. The word viable is a little too open-ended,
Yeah.
okay? Viable to some people means like, can I do a thing
Right.
at all? Viable to me means, can I do it for a price that is less than someone will pay me to do it? And that's why these old technologies become viable
Right.
over time.
Yes.
Right. So, for example, we've had the ability to make fuels out of syngases and CO2 for decades.
Right.
Right. It's suddenly now in Europe where they're saying, hey, let's capture CO2 from the atmosphere, combine that with, I don't know, some kind of syngas, natural gas or whatever, or maybe hydrogen, pure hydrogen from electrolysis, and then use that to make diesel fuels. Okay. That's an absurd idea
Right.
40 years ago because, we didn't care about CO2 emissions, and let's just go drill for oil and make diesel.
Right.
What are we doing? Why are we pulling all these levers?
Right.
Well, in Europe now, if they make the economic decision, then it becomes viable. Maybe that's the cheapest way to make low carbon or no carbon diesel. As expensive as it may be, cheapest is still important.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Because that's what makes an industry move is if it's has a return on investment, no matter what you're doing.
sure, and or for whatever reason you're forced to do something, and this is the cheapest way to do it.
Yeah.
So that also happens too, which is the same as a return on investment. But I don't like to use that term all the time because sometimes as a finance person, when you're comparing two negatives, that definition doesn't really work anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what you mean.
Yes. Yeah.
There's no confusion here.
Right.
It is obvious, but still it makes me start doing mental jumping jacks, and I don't like doing mental jumping jacks. I prefer to know what I'm talking about, So
Yeah. So what's an example of a technology that wasn't viable that is viable now?
So I'd say a lot of the things that we're looking at right now with hydrogen production, actually probably we're not very viable in any case.
Sure.
So for example, now a lot of people are looking at, are we going to use SMRs? We're going to use ATRs. We're going to use electrolysis. Where's the energy going to come from? All of these types of questions. The fact of the matter is those technologies really haven't changed. They're pretty similar today to what they were the first time someone really thought about doing this and said, okay, how do I make this commercial at all? But the market for these things, now they have changed, right? Suddenly now it is potentially believable that you might use hydrogen and you might make a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle and use that for transportation fuel. It's not crazy anymore that we might have a hydrogen bus or something along those lines. So that technology definitely changed because 30, 40 years ago, probably no one was really seriously looking at hydrogen. Today, if you're not seriously looking at hydrogen, you might really be missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I know you need to take off, Philip, and I really appreciate you being on the show today. When we get back, we'll go to talk with Alex about artificial intelligence.
New Tech Global has been around a long time, for 25 years now. We do really three major things. We have a division that recruits, staffs, provides contract contingent talent for oil and gas companies and other industries as well. We have a environmental division, which is a full service environmental services division, mainly for oil and gas, but other industries as well. And we also have a project management, asset management division that we call Auburn, who do projects and asset management for the oil and gas industry.
NTG Auburn is part of New Tech Global's solution services. In addition to NTG staffing and consulting, NTG wants to grow and expand its delivery of environmentally friendly and safe projects for both the energy industry and the energy transition industry. NTG Environmental and NTG Auburn provide the subject matter expertise, the processes, as well as the tools to effectively accomplish this goal.
Welcome back. So, Alex, every industry you kind of hear this buzzword that's kind of going around: AI, artificial intelligence. Where do you see AI helping you in your daily job?
So I think right now we've reached a point where it's become pretty obvious to me that AI is going to end up being everywhere.
Right.
But you have to be so utterly careful about how you use artificial intelligence. And I say this almost as a real warning to people, because, the concern that I have with AI is that people use the tool almost to replace their own thinking,
Right.
Their own responsibility to really be analyzing something properly. I don't think AI is all that great at that.
Right.
Let me tell you what I mean by that. So right now, these artificial intelligence things, first of all, I don't want to call it a misnomer, but it's almost a misnomer, right? What they're mostly based on are these things called large language models. And what these things do is they take essentially all the information in the world, right? And then they kind of synthesize that down to an answer,
right? Which
means that the answer they give you, probably the way they do it, it's probabilistically weighted, is based on what the most popular answer is.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so that raises a couple of problems. The first one is, if you're just regurgitating what everyone else thinks, I don't know how useful that is.
Right.
But the second one is, if you're a company, if you're an entrepreneur or the CEO of a company, thinking about how you differentiate your company, the answer from an AI is probably the one that doesn't differentiate you at all. It's the one that makes you the most in the pack possible.
Right.
Now, there's an old thing that we learn about in business school. Right? So business school is, if you're the leading company, okay, every company behind you, what you want to do is match every move they make. If they develop something, you develop the same thing. They develop something else, you develop the same other thing, right? So unless you're the leading company and you're getting your ideas from AI, right? Everybody else is just going to end up following you. They're going to end up doing exactly what they want you to do.
Yes.
That's not good. You don't get ahead that way.
Right.
So there is an element of having to think about these things, think about how to take that tool, use it to the best of its ability, but not overuse it, and definitely don't use it to replace your own creativity.
Right.
Because that could be a big problem.
Yes. Human judgment in using AI can be very oversimplified, I guess you'd say, because if people rely on it too much, we're all going to be thinking the same way.
Well,
Is that kind of what you're saying?
It's super convenient, right? So I use AI all the time.
Yeah.
Right. If I need, for example, to work on some quick marketing material, right? I know that I can use a tool like, just ChatGPT, for example, or any of these, types of tools to very rapidly get a product out that's good enough. But you still have to lead it. You have to tell it what you want. You have to make sure that it understands. I was talking with the CEO of Occam's Technologies a few months ago. We had a conversation about this. One of the things I said to him is, look, treat the AI like it's a 5-year-old, but the smartest 5-year-old in the world, okay? Put all the safeguards in that you would if it was an immature 5-year-old, but brilliant, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't know what you're asking for. It's not mature.
Yes.
It doesn't know whether there should be safeguards or not on what it tells you, right?
Right.
It just knows that it's smart and it knows how to do what you ask it to do if you give it good instructions.
Right.
Don't assume that the AI is itself actually brilliant and mature and knows about the importance or the weight of what it's suggesting.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't.
Yeah. Where do you see Occam's Technology bringing that artificial intelligence into their business model and maybe moving forward? Or do you see it being used?
Yeah, I would say with Occam's Technologies, apart from, using it as a tool to help advance, essentially to multiply our relatively tiny team and make us feel like we're, 30, 40 people when we're really just a few.
Yeah.
Beyond that as a time-saving method, there's not really much value in what we specifically do. But other clients that I've worked with, for example, I was working for a while with a robotics company that does downhole tools that use artificial intelligence to essentially place themselves, in the well where they need to specifically go, or things like that. For them, And for companies like that, artificial intelligence is tremendously powerful.
Right.
So it just depends on the application. I mean, if I were representing a company, for example, that's trying to figure out how to mitigate or eliminate methane emissions from West Texas, AI would be an invaluable tool for that.
Right.
It just depends on the applications. Some things more valuable than others, but doesn't mean it won't be ubiquitous. It will be in every company in some form or another.
Yeah. Is there an industry that, you do consulting? Is there industries that you feel like you don't fit in and you don't really want to do consulting for, or is it pretty much any industry you're willing to, if one of our listeners wants to take you on, just like New Tech Global did, is to be an advisor?
So, I mean, the short answer to that question is I will work with any company that I don't have a strict moral or ethical exception. Like if I don't have a strict moral or ethical reason why I would say no to them,
Yeah.
There's not really a lot of people I would say no to.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, kind of as I said earlier in this conversation, math is math.
Mm-hmm.
And fundamentally, if your job is to help people understand the math of their business, to understand how their business really operates and, what kind of business plans they should be developing, but doing it in a, rigorous approach where you're really looking at real numbers, real data, real information about maybe their facility or how they operate or anything like that. Nah, there's nothing I would be particularly scared or reticent to challenge myself to go after.
Good. Well, Alex, I really appreciate you being on with us today. Your curiosity about everything is it's very intriguing, and I really appreciate you being on. And I want to thank everybody else for tuning in today. Please make sure you follow us on our social media. And I believe, Alex, you have a bunch of social media that they can kind of reach out to you if anybody has questions or needs to reach you. And everybody have a great day.